Hello. Welcome to episode 3 of The Feist, the podcast that talks about your favorite sports with your feistiest friends. I'm Sarah Gross, and I am a former professional triathlete and the founder and CEO of Feisty Media. And I am here with sports journalist. We're not in the same room today, Kelly O'Mara.
Sometimes I feel like we spend so much of the day talking that I forget we actually do not live by each other. So
I know. That's good though. The vibes are good.
Vibes are good. Yeah. What are we talking about today? Oh yeah. We're talking about all the sports. That's what I was like, we're talking about all the sports.
We're talking about women's sports, Kelly. Come on.
Women's sports. Yeah, we figured we would tell you like what we watched last week, what was awesome, what you should be watching this upcoming week, which may end up being the most watched women's sport event ever. Sneak
Could
peek.
be coming up this week. I mean, I wonder if anyone can guess what that is ahead of time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off there, Kelly.
No, that's a good point. Can you guess? Because we'll be covering that later. And then we're gonna get super in the weeds. I feel like super in the weeds with Kelly and Sara is a segment I've been waiting for.
Yes.
A long time.
For sure. You know what? Like, this is something we didn't say last time, but we go way back in podcasting. Like, I think this is like over the last decade, we've had 4 different podcasts together?
Yeah, because we just started in the Rio Olympics. We covered the Rio Olympics.
Yes. With that podcast called 5 Ring Circus. And I used to get comments all the time. Like, I'd be at the pool and people would be like, that podcast is amazing. That's when I knew.
That was our best name, I have to tell you.
It was. But that's when I knew that we were destined to be podcast buddies forever.
So those are all the things we're covering today. Sports, more sports.
Plus in the weeds sports. So before I get started, I do want to thank our sponsors. We do have 2 sponsors already here on episode 3. So Previnex, who they are a supplement company that Feisty Media broadly works with, and we've been working with them for years. I use their creatine product. I use their Neurify, the protein product. I have about 4 different, the immune system product too. And I even travel with it. That's what a friend of mine said to me. She's like, if you have a supplement and you have to take it when you travel, like, then you know that you use it and it's having good effect. So yeah, we vet all of the products that we promote. So that's what Previnex, the links are in the show notes. And then Hedes, who make the women's specific running shoes, which I've now been running in for at least a couple of years and really love what Lindsay and her team are doing because they're doing all the research and development for women's specific running shoes, which we know is so important. And there's a lot of great companies working in this space now, and Hedes is one of them. So also highly recommend that. So 2 great sponsors to start us off here.
It's made me immediately, Sarah, given that we were debating our High Rocks competitiveness like a week ago.
Yes.
How much are you running these days? This is what I need to know.
Okay, I said this because I'm doing a relay this weekend for a triathlon where I have to run 10 kilometers. and I probably run 6 to 8 kilometers two times a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So we can do High Rocks. Yeah, we'll be fine.
We can do High Rocks slowly.
Yeah, we'll be fine. All right. So I was telling you, I wanted to start with what sports did we watch last week? Because I feel like, there's a lot of sports and you got to pick your favorites. I will start. I want to give a shout out, a call out, even though she doesn't need it, to the 2 world records that I did see briefly during the pre-classic track meet. We teased it last week. Faith Kipyegon was going to go after the 1500 meter world record, and she did it. She went 3:48, which I have to tell you, according to the super graded tables that say how good that 1500 is as a mile, it was better than her mile with all the Nike technology. So maybe crowds and competition actually do more.
Right. And I feel maybe for the energy, and that graded from 1500 to a mile is not that much longer. I feel like that graded number has actual value in this case. And honestly, I have to tell you, you called it. You were the one who was you watch, there's very quickly after this, there's going to be records are going to drop. And they did. And her bestie in the 5,000.
I did not realize they were best friends, but Beatrice Chebet became the first woman to break 14 minutes in the 5K on the track. And then they like hugged the finish line, and apparently they like trained together. And she was like, well, if Faith can set a world record, I can set a world record, which I'm not sure that's how that works for the rest of us. But, you know, it was like a good, yeah.
It does though. Like this is the complete rule of like who you surround yourself with is kind of like the person you become. And I know we've talked about this before, but like I think it's true in training environments I've been in where like when your training partner goes out and wins a big championship race,
Right.
you're like, oh, if she can do it, I can do it.
Sure. So 2 world records. I didn't watch the whole meet, but I watched parts of that. And then I was watching Euros, which there's like a technical name for it. It's called like the UEFA European Championship, but it's the soccer tournament, the soccer championship for Europe. Euros.
Honestly, the acronyms, they throw me. I have to be honest. Like it's this is across sports. If you don't know the acronyms, you're like, what? And then I just tend to like blank out. So I didn't really realize that I knew there was a soccer tournament. And I didn't realize like where it was until we saw they changed in Switzerland, they changed the little walk sign to a female soccer player on the crosswalks. Did you see that?
I did, yeah. In Basel, they changed the flashing walk person to a woman kicking a soccer ball, which is super cute. Because Euros, they are kind of like trying to go huge. They expect 600,000 people in attendance, like massive viewership numbers. It's a tournament that's held every 4 years, but the 2021, whatever. The last one was off a year because of the pandemic, basically. Right. I was like trying to do the math there. And so the last time around, England won, and it set like a bunch of huge viewership records, and everybody was like, oh my God, like people watch women's soccer. And now this time they expected to go even bigger. So I was watching some of the games. I have a really hard time watching countries play that are not the United States.
Sorry. You're definitely what do you call it when somebody loves their country? So
well, I don't, but I was just like I was watching Wales, Netherlands, because of course you're rooting for Wales, and it was very close to the half.
Of course you are. Why are you of course rooting for Wales?
They're obviously the underdog. They're like a country of like the size of like town. Yeah. And Netherlands is like super, super dominant. So they were tied for a long time, right? Until like the 44th minute. And then the Netherlands blew it out. But I was like, I was watching it, but I was like, oh, I kind of don't really like, care that much about either one of these countries because it's not America. And then I watched the France-England game, which is the big one. If anybody, because that's England's the defending champs. France has been like a favorite in almost every international tournament for the like the World Cup, the Olympics, and then they haven't won one yet. And France beat England 2-1 after a goal was called off for offsides. And I'm saying it was bullshit. I'm getting my bullshit.
Kelly, this was this picture that we saw going around of like a static of like where she was called offside. If anyone saw this on social, and she was clearly like not offside.
It was even, and even is, and they were like, well, her foot was behind the other player's foot, and you're like, that is not offside. I'm sorry. My dad was like a ref my whole life, and he was like outraged.
Okay, so that's so offside is not where your foot is; it's where like your body is.
Well, you have to be behind the player, I think is the
But like where is that to wear on the players? I mean, with all this new technology, we need to like redefine these things, right? Like what has to be, no part of your body can be past the other player. If
I thought it was like
finger.
I know. I thought it was because you'll see them standing even all the time. And then they start running once the ball is kicked. So anyway, it's a very controversial call. I know. And so now England has to come back from behind. It's a whole thing, Sarah. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. Okay, well, are you going to update us next week?
Obviously. The funny thing for me, of course, is that, okay, Sarah knows I'm like a low-key, very intense soccer fan, particularly like American soccer, right? Because the U.S. women were so good for so long, right? And this is what I grew up in. Everyone played soccer. And then in the last, 5 years, Europe decided to care about women, and they already cared about soccer. And so very, very quickly, they like surpassed America, because it's not like America cares about soccer, right? Like the men were also playing the Copa America Cup this weekend, U.S. men in Houston, and there were more Mexico fans in the stands than American fans, like hands down. So like America does not care about soccer, but we have always cared about like women's soccer because Title IX gave us like a leg up on, you know, other countries just because of like opportunity. There's also a thing where like, I'm trying to think of a way to say this that isn't going to offend people, but in like men's sports, the best athletes get split among a number of sports, right? Like some of them play football, some of them play basketball, some of them play baseball because there were so many opportunities.
Yeah.
For US women, most of the best athletes ended up in soccer for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Because that was the premier opportunity.
Yes. So
Right.
I was thinking about this while I was running this morning, because back when the Northern Super League launched, which is our Canadian pro women's soccer league, but like I looked up some stats because my feeling was that soccer was such a popular sport among girls when I was growing up. And like by the mid 2000s, like 40% of girls who played sport actually played soccer. Like it was a huge percentage of, like it just built through the 90s. So that perception that soccer was a popular girl sport. But then I had this experience because I did my last year of school in Scotland, of high school. And I had this experience of like being outside, I don't know, like kicking a ball around with, like there were some guys playing soccer and I like joined, whatever. And one of them said, I've never seen a girl kick a soccer ball like that. Right.
Right.
And like I can tell you, I was not special at kicking a soccer. Like I didn't just like grab that ball and keep CFCs for 15 touches. You know, like that's not what I did. I just kicked it. Stopped it maybe and kicked it. But like it's in the UK, somewhere like the UK, which I can speak to because I've lived in a lot, like where sports, I think you see this probably in all countries, like where sports have a very strong hold in like the male side of sports, it's been harder, I think, for women to get into that sport. Whereas I think the part of the reason that culturally it was easier here in North America for girls to play soccer is that we're more like a football, hockey, basketball culture. And so like soccer was like open for the taking. So,
right. Like, sure, let the women have that one.
Yeah. Like, and now you see that attitudes are changing. And so you see sort of that change. And then to your point, like in some European countries where they have so much soccer expertise, the women just fast forwarded their level of play. That's my theory. It's my personal theory.
No, I think that's true too. I mean, you see that some, like we both come from like triathlon or running, and you see that some of the countries that take triathlon very, very seriously. Whereas here it's kind of like, sure, let the women be equal. We don't care about it. What do you like?
Yeah, or like I think about that even now with the rise of volleyball in North America too. Like we're just like volleyball just shot up out of nowhere, and suddenly you have 90,000 people at a game in Nebraska, right? And who knew volleyball was so popular? But it's because the women's game was able to develop really quickly.
So Europe cares about soccer now. They've been kicking our ass. I mean, obviously the US women came back and won gold after we took England's coach. We were at that game at the Olympics. Very exciting. But yeah, so the Euros tournament is a very big deal. It's probably like the second biggest tournament, kind of third biggest outside World Cup and Olympics. And I think they're already breaking like all their viewer and attendance numbers that they were expecting.
So the stat that I loved out of this was that like the actual revenue out of the tournament was double what it was for the previous tournament. That was just 3 years ago. Like you said, it wasn't 4, it was 3 years ago. And like, I love a good revenue number, right? like because we get a lot of investment numbers these days, right? Which is great because investment means growth. And you're like, great, amazing. But like actually a revenue number is like the women's sport is actually making money, right? Like investment is growth, but revenue is like sustainable. So sustainable growth, I should say. So yeah, double the revenue. That's amazing.
It's great. And I will care enough to watch. They're still in pool play right now, but even I can manage to watch non-American games once they get down to, you know, semis, finals.
I was so proud of you, Kelly.
Thank you. The other big sports this past week, though, or that's, I guess, it'll still be going on when you hear this, is the Giro d'Italia women. It is in its, I'm going to guess, 36th or 38th year. It's actually, I didn't realize this until this week, the oldest women's, like high-level pro women's stage race. Like it's been going on, it's just pretty long now.
I didn't know, since 1988 and consistently. Right? So like I think very few people realize that like cycling had like a bit, everything grows in waves, right? And cycling had a bit of a heyday, like in the 80s, like late 80s through the early 2000s. And then somewhere in the early 2000s, things started to get canceled again, right? But the Giro d'Italia Feminine, is that what they call it? Femminile.
They actually just call it Giro d'Italia women. Like, for some reason, they don't put that part in Italian. I don't know why.
Right. Oh, yeah, the Giro d'Italia women. That's what it is. Yeah.
Women.
I'm trying to make up some word. Yeah. But like kudos to it, like has been going consistently since 1988.
Yeah. And I will say, so I watched, so the Tour de France Homes, the men's tour is also happening right now. And then when it finishes in 3 weeks, the Tour de France Femmes starts like as it finishes to kind of like build into it. And so the Giro women has happened during the men's tour for how last so many years. And it will move to its own time slot next year, which should be like good for viewers. Yeah. But the point I'm going with is I watched a little bit of the men's tour and then I watched some of the women's Giro. And I know everyone's like, why don't the women get a 3-week tour? Why don't the men race 7 days? It's way more exciting. It's like there's less like bullshit filler. I don't have the capacity to watch 3 weeks of like 5-hour stages every day. It's like then because it's a survival race for 3 weeks, there's so much stuff where it's just like they just have like they're just trying to survive. So like you just have 4 hours of riding. Like it's not interesting. Whereas like these 7 and 8 day women's tours, which is what the Giro d'Italia women is, which is what Tour de France Femmes is, they are able to pack in like a lot more excitement because you can actually race like every day. They don't have rest days, which is a little crazy. Like even as they're extending the Tour de France Femmes to like another day, they're not adding rest days, which is getting tough, I think. Yeah. And then women's racing is also like the distances tend to be a little shorter. We can argue about whether it's good or bad, but like it makes it like they're not just out there like slogging away for 7 hours, right? Like, yeah, it's actually punchy and exciting.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. I think it's and you've made this point several times elsewhere, but like we don't always have to do things the way that the men do. Like we can make our own race and build our own, like if we want it to be exciting over 8 days, then let it be. You know, I understand asking the question about like why are the men racing over 3 weeks and the women only racing over 8 or 9 days? Like, okay, I understand that question. And I also understand that like the reason the women don't race over 3 weeks is built upon a legacy of like people literally believing that women can't do it. So I think I mean, obviously we're way past that point. We know women can do it, but I think now we just build it how we want.
Sure. And you do have this other problem though, that like you saw this in the French Open too, or in the boxing match we're about to talk about, preview, where like people are like, well, spectators have paid for a ticket. The men play more matches in the French Open, right? It's best of 5, not best of 3. Or like, oh, well, their rounds are longer. So spectators get more for their money. So we have to give them the primetime spot because people want so it becomes this like self-perpetuating circle of defeat. Yeah.
Well, that's dumb.
Well, that's dumb.
I mean, I don't really have another response to
I'll let the head of the French Open know.
Just say Sarah said it was dumb. Well, it is. I mean, like we know when you've seen, I've heard people talk about this, like how like the women's game in tennis, it's had time to evolve. It's evolved into kind of a different thing than the men's game. There's longer rallies. You do hear people say they prefer sometimes to watch the women's game because of that, blah, blah, blah. Like, and I think that's why there is a little resistance to going to 5 instead of 3. And so like, I don't know. It's just dumb. Like give the women the main they will watch. Like we have the stats are in. Like in the
stats are in.
Like you put the Olympic Games on TV and like what was it? 60% of Americans watched. What was the stat of watched the women's, like more people watched by a minor amount, but still more people watched like the women in the Olympic Games than the men. Yeah. And there were more women from like the US, countries like the US and Canada who are competing than men too. So like that's part of it. But
we've established Americans only watch Americans. So.
Except for you, Kelly. Now you're branching out into the European soccer tournament. So
sure.
I do have a question. Okay, I do have a question for you about you pronounced it wrong, but I'm going to give you kudos anyway. Tour de France, is that just you that's now calling it because
I
the women's version is the Tour de France Femme,
It
right?
was originally the Tour de France Femme, and a lot of people did start saying the Tour de France, like kind of like WNBA and the MNBA.
Yeah.
Like it starts to feel like a little bit like why are we referring to the women's version instead
Yeah.
of her versions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I say Homes because I mean I'm in America, Sarah. People aren't going to know what I'm saying otherwise.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't because I'm just like when I hear that I'm like, what is she saying? The impact is lost.
Sure.
Because so we need to practice your Tour de
French.
Tour de France.
No, that sounds crazy.
That sounds
Now,
crazy.
when that sounds crazy. When this comes out,
Mhm.
the Giro, the women's Giro, will have 3 more days.
Mhm.
The Queen stage is on Saturday. It's like super crazy to finish up this climb. It's like the longest stage. Now you have like the biggest name. A lot of the biggest names are saving themselves for the Tour de France Femmes in 3 weeks
Mhm.
because that is still
Makes
a
sense.
huge deal. Yeah,
Mhm.
but you do have like Lottie Kopecky, Marianne Voss. So like names that people know. Elisa, I can never Logo Barriga. I can't say it again. It's very Italian. I have to say it with like an Italian accent. Burkino. And she's a defending champ. So it's not like it's there are some good names
Mhm.
on there.
And Kelly, cycling related, what is happening? We made a post about this last week on Feisty. What is happening with the UCI and the handlebar rules? Like, it's something to do with like the
Handlebars.
size of the handlebars.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, like people are doing crazy things with their bikes in general.
Okay, I hadn't, but like to make them more
And
aero or more light and stuff like that.
right.
Okay,
And so, like, one of the things that's gotten really popular is making the top of your handlebars narrower and like flaring out the drops, kind of like
oh
you
yeah,
see
I
in
have
gravel
seen that.
racing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I mean, I don't know that this is unsafe or like safe. Like, I have no opinion about that.
Hmm.
But the UCI decided they had to crack down because UCI is always like 3 years behind everybody, and they said that now there has to be like a minimum width for the top hoods of your handlebars and for the bottom. The
Okay,
problem is that the width they gave is like too big for most women, if that makes sense.
right.
So like apparently, like if you go around the pro women's teams, it's something like 14 out of 16 riders will not have bikes that comply with this new rule. And it's not because they're trying to be unsafe, it's because women have smaller shoulders, they need narrower
Yeah,
handlebars to like fit to like be able to grab their brakes while they're
yeah.
riding. Um and it seems like the UCI just like didn't think about women. Shockingly.
So
Shocking.
yeah, because that seems like such an obvious thing, and we know that like narrow handlebars is part of like a women's specific bike fit. So like, what did when people said back to the UCI, hey, are there different rules for women, or what did they say? Like, how did they explain that?
Do you ever have you noticed because something similar happened in triathlon recently where people are freaking out about rules and then they issue a clarification,
Right?
which seems to be just restating the rule.
Oh, that's what they
You know,
did.
when they're like, yeah, so they were like, there's been some confusion. And they issue a clarification and it's just like a restating of what they already said.
Right.
So they haven't changed anything. They haven't said they're going to change it, but there has been a lot of outrage and obviously it disproportionately affects women. Like all the bike fitters are saying that, the teams are saying that, but it's not like it's not like male cyclists are giant people. And so
Yeah.
some of them are also very small
Yeah.
and it's affecting them too. There was some reporters who went around the men's tour right now and measured and couldn't find any bikes that comply
At the
currently.
men's tour?
Yeah. Now, granted, they're doing some like very flared out stuff,
Right.
but it's still funny if there's no bikes that currently comply.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
mean, the UCI, there are a lot of organizations, as we talked about, that have a history of, I mean, at best, just not thinking about women, right? At worst, like actively
Mhm.
preventing them from doing stuff. And the UCI is certainly up there on the list of organizations that has not been awesome.
Yeah, I'm very confused why they haven't updated their files despite like years and years of pushback. on like you're
Right.
not considering the women. You're not consider can the women join the Tour de France, femme? No. Like again and again, you know?
So we'll see what happens. But yeah, the Tour de France Femme is in 3 weeks from this past weekend. And I know we're gonna have a preview. We're gonna have some people join us. It's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal in the world of bike racing.
It is, yeah. But in the meantime, like kudos to the Tour d'Italia women that is happening right now for like the Giro d'Italia women, which has stood the test of time. Like where like I was just thinking about that in to continue to have a race since 1988 when we had like years and years of folks like Catherine Bertine, who's a friend of ours, like going to the Tour de France and saying like, can we have a women's race? And them being like, okay, you can have one day. And then, like all these iterations of like trying to have women involved in the big events in cycling. And you have this one that I feel is like under celebrated. So go out and watch it. Watch the Giro d'Italia women, man.
Yeah. Saturday, last big stage. So it'll be exciting.
Cool.
The other thing that people should watch this weekend, well, I don't know, maybe you don't want to watch it because you're not a boxing fan, but Friday is going to be the third round rematch of Amanda Serino and Katie Taylor. Why did I say Thomas? And here's the thing. Did you watch it that when they went up against each other in November? Did you see this, Sarah?
I saw part of it. I was aware of it because it broke the viewership records, right? And they expected like the big thing to be the men's event. Meanwhile, the women like stole the show.
It was one of those like stunt boxing matches. Jake Paul was fighting Mike Tyson. And if you tuned in, it was basically because we all just wanted to see Jake Paul get his ass kicked. It was why all of us tuned in. And then it was super boring. But right before it was the women's undercard, which was Amanda Serino and Katie Taylor. And it was actually like, I'm not a boxing person at all. I think I've seen like 3 matches in my life, but it was actually like really exciting, really good. And then I think it like word spread and 74 million, it averaged 74 million viewers. So then it became like the most watched women's sporting event ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, granted, those are reported by Netflix numbers, and Netflix is notoriously self-reporting, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like there's no checks
for sure.
It's numbers.
But like it's coming up on my Netflix as like the recommended watch now. And I think, okay, I don't know if I really even want to admit this, but like I definitely have trouble watching boxing. Like I'm one of those people who's like watching people fight each other is difficult. Yeah. But I think I'm going to, for the sake of you and the podcast and women's sports. Yeah, this is the depth of my commitment to women's sports. I'm gonna.
I will say, it was surprisingly, like I'm not like I don't really like MMA or like I don't want to watch people fight each other, but it was surprisingly like less violent and more athletic.
Yeah,
I think
I fully acknowledge that it's athletic. Like I'm not going to make those arguments that like, oh, it's too violent, we shouldn't have boxing. It's just like not my personal preference. So because I'm going to watch, Kelly.
It is also it's on Netflix on Friday. It's also the first all women's card at Madison Square Garden. So all of the undercards are women too, which is like a really big deal. And so like the Katie Taylor, Amanda Sereno is like the headliner, and they're getting paid like a record amount of money for a women's boxing match. But it's also like, again, like there are undercards. And I will say the other thing is like, so I get very confused by the names of the weight classes in boxing, like welterweight versus featherweight. Like, I don't know which one's bigger.
Exactly,
right?
Like feather's light.
Right. You're like, is that good or bad? So I had to like figure this out because one of the things was that Sereno has been like a world champion in like 7 different weight classes. So then you're like, so she clearly, and then but she's smaller. So she had to step up a bunch, like 3 weight classes to fight Katie Taylor. So that's like obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, but that like should be obvious. That's like a slight disadvantage, right? But then and so she's lost twice now. But the last time, the one in November, it was I don't know the word, controversial. It was a judge's decision, and I would say the fans were not with the judge's decision.
Okay.
And if you were watching, her dad got in the ring and like took the mic like during
Her
the
dad?
belt ceremony and started yeah. Well, he's also her coach or something, but he like definitely just started like talking shit like right there in the ring on the mic, which I just thought was hilarious.
That just sounds so boxing to me.
Yeah.
Admitting that I know nothing about the sport, that just sounds really like dads getting in the ring and like grabbing the microphone. Like what?
No, I thought that was pretty
That's
funny.
awesome.
Well, obviously, I mean, it like kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like the smaller person wants it to be kind of more of a like cardio, tire the person out
Yeah.
competition, and the bigger person wants to like use kind of like their weight. So the other thing was that men traditionally fight 12 rounds of 3 minutes, and women traditionally fight 10 rounds of 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And Amanda Serrano was pushing for the 12 rounds of 3 minutes, but they like couldn't reach an agreement.
Oh.
So it will be the 10 rounds of 2 minutes. But I think that's interesting because that sounds like such a short amount of time difference, but it adds up.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's and this again, does it come from like a legacy of like women shouldn't play for more than 2 minutes at a time? Like what is happening? Why?
You want to talk about like sports where we really didn't let women play, like boxing.
Yeah.
Again, to your point about like you're just like, oh, I don't really want to see people fight. If you go and start looking at even as women's boxing was being added to the Olympics just like 10 years ago, there's all these columnists and writers who are like, I just don't want to see women hit each other. Call me a chauvinist. Yeah.
Which is why I don't even like saying that. Like that's why I'm like, I'm going to watch this. I need to do this for womankind because I'm fully aware that like arguments like those were used to like keep us out of sports. Like not just boxing, but like all kinds of sports. Right? Like it's too violent for the women's. You know?
Interestingly, though, apparently, like the first women's boxing match history record suggests was like back in 1870, and like back in the 1904 Olympics, they had women and men as like exhibition events, but then only the men got accepted into the actual Olympics. And then it was, you know, whatever, 100 more years before we had women's boxing.
Right. And I think I shouldn't be history never ceases to surprise me. You know, like I think sometimes we see almost like the feminist movement of society, like towards more and more like freedoms for women as linear, you know, and it's so not that at all. And there's countless examples from history, but like
or from Kirby.
And even though I'm aware of that, I'm still surprised that in 1904 you had women boxing in the Olympics, you know? It's great.
I mean, even like when you're talking about European soccer before, like women had a pro league back in the 40s and 50s, and then England Football Association like banned them from playing on pitches. So you're like, okay. So it's like there's stuff like that throughout.
Right. You know? I think that's what I meant when I was talking about like it's kind of like patriarchal attitudes that kept women out of soccer/football in places like the UK, right? Whereas like we didn't have in North America, we didn't have men wanting to protect their pitches because they didn't care about soccer. Like it's not because they wouldn't have.
No.
Right? It's just because they were like women can play soccer, I don't care.
I believe because I played a lot when I was a little. And I believe my mom was at like a relative's extended family event, neighbor in Texas, and was told soccer, fucking foreign pansy ass sport. So that is the general attitude.
Oh, geez. Yeah, oh, God. Yeah, so bad.
I didn't care. Like, women took it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, exactly.
So boxing was interesting because yeah, obviously that then got heavily dominated by men and became a very like male dominated space. And it's only really been, I feel like, last 40 years or so that you've seen like an emergence of female boxers. So.
I support it.
So you should watch.
You're gonna watch.
Everyone should watch.
Yeah. Watch women's sports.
On Netflix.
Everybody should watch. Yeah, I love that. I do love this over the last couple of years, how there's been more live sports on Netflix. You know, because that's kind of where people watch their programming now. So it's good for sports.
I was thinking about this weekend when I was, you know, skimming through the channels, and there's like a billion different things you can watch of sports. And I don't know if it's convenient or if it's just a coincidence that the emergence of people realizing that, there's a market for women's sports came at the same time as like all of these different outlets are trying to fill their programming.
Mhm.
So they're like, sure, let's put on, I don't even know, there was like random, right? Like, yes, it's like, okay, let's sign a WNBA deal. Okay, let's sign a volleyball deal. Okay. But there's also like a lot of random stuff on every channel you could possibly imagine. As somebody who has linear TV and I'm
Yes.
skimming through it, I'm like, there's a lot of sports
Right.
you could choose to.
Right.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
kind of worked out.
Yeah. It's kind of good timing. Well, it's just, I mean, that's just, you could see the same thing with the internet. Just the internet. And like more places to watch. You can get the information you want. You can find a streaming service that streams women's sports. Yeah.
So I did watch a little bit of WNBA this weekend too. Just because there's so many options.
So many options. I love it.
Mhm. All right. We have been talking for a long time about the Super in the Weeds with Kelly and Sara.
Mhm.
Segment I've wanted to bring to the people.
The segment everyone's been waiting for.
Everyone's been waiting for. Because we were talking here very like broadly, like the sports of the week, like highlights, things to know about. But I feel like every now and then we need to go super in the weeds, super detailed on like a very specific thing.
Right.
This is mine. And so of course,
yes, of course.
have to start with triathlon.
Our first week, we're going to go with triathlon because I mean, and Ironman triathlon specifically, because they've made a number of recent announcements about the qualification system for the World Championships, and that's the race that's like in Kona in Hawaii that everyone knows, like the one you saw on TV when you were a kid.
Yeah. So Ironman has decided, whatever, they're going back to Kona. They were not at Kona for the last couple of years. They're kind of split, moving around. And earlier this year, when they announced that they were going back, they also announced that the men and the women would go back into one day, whereas the women had their own championship for the last couple of years. And they announced that qualification would be somewhat proportional to participation, meaning like the women would get less spots. They've now announced this last week their what the new qualification system is. And I feel, Sara, like they made it as confusing as possible to explain it. When in reality, it is a handicap system by age and gender. Like they're basically giving everyone a handicap.
Right.
And then they're going to rate everyone at like according to your handicap at a given qualifying race. And then they're just going to take the top however many spots there are.
Right.
That's essentially what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think people understand handicaps because golf. Because
and that's well put, actually. And I think that it is a handicap system. And then I think what it ends up doing is essentially for them getting, and I think it does accomplish this, is getting the most competitive people in these. This is for like what would be the Ironman equivalent of Masters World Championships, except for it starts at age 19. So I don't
right.
The age group, the age group World Championship qualification, because the pros qualify slightly differently, right? So in a whole separate system. So yeah, this is like an attempt to get the most competitive people at a World Championship, which on the surface sounds like a good goal. And I think this does accomplish that. What it does mean, though, is that because you have men and women in the same pool of athletes, it does mean that we're probably going to end up with about 30 to 40% women.
I think 35 is what most people I've run the models on. And everyone's like, oh, this is a big improvement for women. It was about 27%, 28% before. So it's not, everyone's acting like it's hugely about more. It's not, it's about 150 more women in the world. Which is like more, like sure.
Yeah. And potentially if your filter is you want the most competitive World Championship, then it's probably a greater percentage of the more competitive men and women at the World Championship. So there's some things that are accomplished by this age graded system. And this isn't the only, like Ironman's not the only place that uses age graded systems to rank athletes against each other. So like, it's like, and there's different systems in different places. Like the one, for example, that would come into play in my life is like I do every year for fun, I do the CrossFit Open, right? So I know that I'm in like the 85th percentile in my age group. And even though there's like literally thousands and thousands of people in my age category who are better at CrossFit than me, I can still be like the 85th percentile. That sounds good. So I'll take that, right?
That's amazing. Yeah, and like it's common in running, like at least around where I live, like you used to see kind of on your result at the very far right, there'd be listed like your age grade percentile, right? And you would be, when I was 27, I would be like the 82nd, and the 56-year-old woman who ran next to me would be like the 97th percentile, because obviously
Right.
she was significantly better as a 57-year-old woman if she was running the same time I was at 27, right? That like it's like an interesting asterisk. It's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yes. So I have to tell you, okay, so if we're going to get in the weeds, so I was using ChatGPT, right, to try to find out like where else in the world we're using this age graded system and what the age graded system is being used for. Because what I was trying to find out is whether there's any other sport that uses an age graded system to actually qualify people for a world championship, right? Versus like, just like you're saying, like you run a marathon and you're like, oh, cool, I'm in this percentage in the world. Or you do like your local park run and you know that you're in a good percentage for your age group, or it's just like a fun add-on. And I kept like asking, I was like, maybe ChatGPT doesn't understand like qualifying. I was like asking in like all different language. And Kelly, ChatGPT yelled at me. Like,
well, maybe you should just try Googling and researching.
Oh, I did that too. And like I also did like with ChatGPT, I also did like when it gave me an answer, I was like, can you give me the links? And I would go down the links. So I was looking at like charts from swimming, from Masters swimming, and from like Grand Prix track, right? Where they would show the charts and how they did it. And they do really use a similar formula to what Ironman's using. So I was like also in the same places you would end up if you Googled. But like you can't really Google what I was trying to get, which was like, is there another sport that uses an age graded system, right, to qualify athletes for a world championship? And the answer to that is no. And ChatGPT was like mad at me. Like it was like, no, it's just not sport. Like you can't have people in a
stop asking.
Yeah, they were like, you can't have people, if you're racing to qualify for something, you have to race head to head. Like this isn't me. This is ChatGPT. Right. You have to be racing head to head. You can't, how can you qualify for world champs that way? And I finally wrote like, is there any exception? And they were like, yes. Ironman World Championships 2020. I was like, okay. And then
I think that is one of the struggles as somebody who like still occasionally, like I've signed up for an Ironman, I probably won't do it, but right? Like still occasionally races. Like the idea that I'm going to like qualify or not based on an algorithm is like, that's not exciting. That's not like I'm gonna be out there running and like what, like my husband's gonna be doing the math and like doing the math for the other people out there and then like putting it into a calculator and applying the handicap factor. Like that's not how sports work. Like I don't know.
And then the other thing that ChatGPT yelled at me for trying to get it to give me an example of qualifying for a world championship with an age graded system is you can't compare men and women. Like it was like, you can't put all the men and women into one age graded system. And then it was giving me literally like throwing at me like the physiological differences between men and women and that women deserve their own sports platform and that like you should have women's sports are its own thing and we can't compare it and every age graded system uses. And I was like, is there any exception? They're like, yes, Ironman World Championship. Like, okay.
I think on a fundamental level, this is your and I's problem with this, which is that it operates on like two base level assumptions, right? One of which is that you should have a world championship for 30-year-olds who aren't professional. Like we're having a semi-pro world championship. Like that makes no fucking sense, right? Because basically they are all semi-pro then.
Yes.
And then two, that fundamentally we're going to have one pool of spots for men and women, and the men and women are going to like face off against each other to like earn the right to get to those start lines, but then they don't race against each other. Like that the women don't deserve their own race and their own day and and that if you're like, it's a world championship, you should just have the best X number of men and the best X number of women. And that should be that, right? Like that is like the underlying assumption here.
Yes.
And I think the thing you and I have been struggling with, and like struggling with Iron with, is like, I don't accept that assumption.
Yeah.
So
Like, I didn't have to say it. I tried to get ChatGPT to make to make Iron Man's argument, and I could not. Like, ChatGPT was like, "No, you can't. Like, you can't have you're literally if you're say you're racing for second in your age group at an Ironman, right? Like, you're not just racing against the other people in your age group to get that slot for the World Championships.
Right.
You're racing against some dude in the 50 to 54 who might be closer to the guy who or to the average of the people who won over the last 5 years. Like, what?
Right. According to the factor. Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's like, again, it's based on like I would kept thinking about like high school level debate or college debate where we all had to agree to a set of assumptions and then we could sit there and argue like
Yes.
who is right. And on a base level, like I don't agree to their set of assumptions.
Yes.
So there's nothing else for me to do. Their half Ironman World Championship, they have like it's an interesting thing because the men and the women's pools of spots are going to be separate and are equal. So they and are on separate days, and the women get their own day and their own race and their own equal number of qualifying spots, and they're only compared against each other in this handicapping system.
Right. So we can agree with that starting point and
Right.
premise. Yes.
And they're like, oh, it's because they're on different days. Whereas the Ironman World Championship is all on one day and they're mixed together. So then it's one pool of spots. And you're like, okay, here's the other thing. Ready for super in the weeds? Super in the weeds. If you do the math on this and you run some races through the algorithm, there are a few races in North America, particularly in the US, where women will earn about half the spots, potentially even more.
Oh, interesting.
Because North American women are among the most competitive, and there are a lot of them because Title IX, and because you also have large quantities, and I mean this as nice as possible, of mediocre men who get out there and just like do things, right? They're like, sure, I can do an Ironman, and they just sign up, right? So if you are then accounting for that, you actually have really large quantities of competitive women in the US and very large quantities of non-competitive men. So you have these races where it actually will be 50-50. And people have been sending me these examples as like, oh, like, isn't that crazy? Like, oh my God. Like, almost as if like, oh, it shouldn't be that way. And I'm like, let me tell you about Title IX. And like decades of access for women and how it led to this and why there are more women in America. It's like on a pure individual basis, German women, British women are better than American. Like I wouldn't argue, right? But we have a higher quantity because of Title IX.
Right.
Right.
Interesting.
And people are just shocked. Like they just are shocked by this.
Right.
That there will end up being certain races where more women could qualify. And I am shocked that they are shocked, Sarah.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that they are.
Yes, I understand that reaction. I mean, to like pull that, I'm going to see if I can pull that thread through like full circle, right?
Okay.
Because like sometimes in order to create the kind of like in the US, they had to put it into law in order to create change. Like sometimes you need a law to get people to actually stop making sexist decisions, stop having a bias towards men's sports, and start spending real money on women's sports, right? In this case, in educational institutions, which is like a ton of the young people who came through generations since the 70s of education, right? High school and university and college. And so that, like, sometimes you have to focus on making something better for women and make it a law. Okay. So here's where I'm going with this is that with like this is the major problem that I have with Ironman's recent decisions is like clearly they've decided to focus on having the most competitive world championship at the expense of the women. Right? So that is you cannot focus on creating a deeper field of women at the Ironman World Championships on women's needs and development and at the same time focus on the most competitive. You have to pick between those two things. Like, which one is your priority? Like, you can do one in slot number one and something else in slot number two of your priorities, right? But something has to be a priority. And for me, I think that
I wouldn't phrase it the way you just said. I think they have. I mean, I think they bought the argument that yes, like that. I think they would agree they're choosing a more competitive championship. I would say they are choosing to serve the needs of their existing customer base,
yes,
which is
yes.
predominantly male and aging.
That is
and that is what they're
that is an excellent add-on. Like that you're not focused on women's development, you're not focused on young people, you're not focused on what the future might hold for sport broadly, right? So like for me, like for you and I, like we spend our lives immersed in this culture of like where women's sports are suddenly getting their own platform, their own, like they have their own media, they have their own ads, they have their own tournaments, and literally Ironman had that. They had like a single day of racing for women. They still have it at the half Ironman 70.3 distance. And they decided to go backwards and away from that. And like, I understand that a lot of women in triathlon also wanted to all race on the same day in Kona. But if you're going to do that and they're not going to have their own platform, you better set up a mega set of like rules around how that's going to work in order to create equity. And they are not.
I feel like that is the second half of that, not mega set of rules, is a in the weeds segment for another
That's
day.
Right. Because if you didn't get enough today,
next time drafting on the Greek Island. No, I feel like next in the weeds we'll have to do CrossFit.
We're gonna have to do something other than triathlon. Yeah.
We could keep going.
Yeah,
I have more thoughts.
I know. Me too, but I think that we're best leaving that one.
This is probably as much as people want to know about triathlon. If you would like to know more, you can let us know. My only rule is if it is a surprise to you that more women would qualify than men at Ironman Texas, I need you to educate yourself before you lecture me about it. Because that is I just don't want to have things explained to me that, are not new information.
I understand.
So. All right. To close out our week, Sarah.
Yes. I'm excited.
I feel like we're going to have a feisty pick for the week, right?
Yes.
So out of all of the highlights of this past week, and there's a lot every week because I write if you don't get the newsletter, if you'd like rather read your sports news, it covers some different things. Sign up for the Feist, like the feistnews.com, and we'll include in the show notes. But every week I like go and find all these different highlights, all these different results, and it's all over the place, Sarah. And it's hard to pick just one. I know. So do you want my pick for the week? And then you tell me your pick?
Yeah.
Okay. Claire Elms is a 61-year-old British woman, and she just ran a 4:59 mile. And it is believed that is the oldest woman to run a sub 5-minute mile.
Wait, she's 61?
Sorry, 1,500 meter, not mile. I should be very clear. 1,500 meters. She's 61.
That's insane. That's so fast. Yeah.
I know. Now I'm like, maybe someday I'll be able to run a sub 5-minute 1,500.
Yeah, that's a very fast. Yeah. Wow. Good for her. I see why you picked her. Good choice. Yeah. Okay, so I'm sticking in the theme of masters athletes. And I won't do this. I'm not going to pick someone I know every week, but this week I am. Because, one of my training partners at CrossFit, Ondine Eason, she went to the World Police and Fire Games, right? Which is a pretty big games. And she won gold in the CrossFit competition in her age group. She's 60 to 64. She went to the CrossFit Games last year. So very good athlete. Okay. Like I have trouble keeping up with her in the CrossFit gym. And then I feel like this is maybe the biggest thing. Her team placed the most competitive competition, as I understand. I could have this detail wrong, but at the Police and Fire Games, you can understand why, is the cornhole. Like, because it's so inclusive, right?
Okay.
And everybody thinks they can play cornhole, right? So she is not a cornhole player per se. And specialist, yeah. And their team came fourth in the cornhole out of like 64 teams or something ridiculous, which I think is wild. So she's like first in the CrossFit competition, fourth in the cornhole, and then she gets recruited to the 4x100 relay on like some kind of international team. Oh, get this here, international team of 40 to 49 age group.
Huh.
So, and they get silver. So I just imagine Ondine over at the games, just like being one of the fittest women in the room and being like recruited to this 4x100 relay. Like, I just love it so much. So so proud of her.
All right, that's our pick for the week. Okay. Next week, I don't know what we're gonna talk about. We're gonna have to see what happens this week, right? Like sports, they move on. New things every week.
Absolutely. So yeah, do us a huge favor and rate and review the podcast, whether you love it or hate it, although you obviously love it. Give us a rating and write a review. It really does help. What else, Kelly?
And yeah, I'm supposed to tell you to follow the podcast, not subscribe, because it is free for all. So follow the podcast on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube. And if you want to get the newsletter, you can sign up for the newsletter. We cover different things. We talk WNBA, CBA negotiations, which maybe that's what we'll talk about next week. Because I know we're going to have some WNBA front office, behind the scenes people come and talk to us soon. So tune in next week.